Hello and welcome to course 81065 for Dynamics 365 for Field Service. My name is Derek Borman and I will be your instructor for this course. Over this course, we're going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about the new field service functionality that's available as part of Dynamics 365. We're going to look at many of the different features that are involved, such as just providing you a quick little overview and introduction of how the application works. You know, how do you navigate around? What's a work order? How does the service board work? What do you use the service board for in regards to scheduling work orders, whether you're scheduling them manually or non-manually? Why would you use field service from an implementation perspective? We're also going to look at how you set up and configure the application in order to really go out and take full advantage of all of the capabilities that field service has to offer, whether it's using the schedule board, the scheduling assistant, or some of the automated routing options. You really need to go in and define first and foremost what your goals and objectives are as an organization. Define some of your price list capabilities, some of the products and services that you're going to be using as part of your implementation, as well as the resources and the people that are actually going to be carrying out these work orders. So we're going to look at some of the different setup and configuration options that are available as part of the application. We're also going to dive into work order management. We're going to walk you through a work order lifecycle capabilities and show you exactly what happens from start to finish within the concept of a work order. We're going to look at things such as how work orders are tied to incidents. We're going to look at some of the different creation options around work orders, whether that's automated through the agreement capability that's available with field service, or whether it's manual through some type of dispatcher, or maybe even a field technician that's out in the field trying to create a work order or create something based upon what they're currently experiencing. We're also going to look at the scheduling and dispatching aspect of it, is how you can go out as a dispatcher and schedule these work orders, and how you can use some of the tools and utilities available to find the appropriate resource for those items. Use some of the filtering capabilities to filter down who's available to work on specific items and really get a bird's eye view as to what's happening within your organization. So if something is slipping or somebody is not maintaining something in the appropriate manner, how do you move things around and really adjust scheduling on the fly to make sure that you're providing the best possible service for your customers? We're also going to look at some of the automation processes around agreements and how agreements can be used to auto-generate things like work orders and work order bookings, so you can automatically define who's going to go out and work on something on a predefined schedule. And we'll also look at how you can take agreements and associate those with sales order processing and some of the sales order options inside the application as well for auto-scheduling and creating some of those items. We'll explore some of the different mobility options as well as the field service mobile application that's available, as well as some of the RESCO options that are available. And then we'll kind of finish it off with talking a little bit around closing work orders and handling inventory and purchasing, and some of the capabilities that are around inventory management and purchasing in the application as well. When you think about how businesses work today, field service is a real major component in today's customer service landscape. Specifically, if you think about all the different types of environments where technicians or people will go out and actually interact with customers in some facet. It could be a glass repair company. It could be something going out to service a printer or fix a refrigerator or something like that. And having an optimized field service solution is critical to that aspect. Not only is it critical to what you're going to deliver to your customers today, but when you look at different things that are working their way into today's world, such as the Internet of Things and machine learning, if you have a very solid foundation built for your field service implementation, that's only going to really help to enhance what you deliver to your customers, because now maybe you can even get into some of the predictive analytics and you can start to really anticipate things before they happen and turn into more of a proactive model as opposed to a reactive model. So in this first module, we're really just going to take a look and provide an overview of field service in general. What are some areas that are critical to how field service works when we talk about generating work orders and dispatching people, and considerations that you want to take into mind when you're working through that. We're also going to look specifically at Dynamics 365's field service capabilities at a high level. We're going to get into obviously each one of those individual components in much more detail as we move through the remainder of the course, but we're just going to give you an overview of some of the key concepts and terminologies and things that you'll want to keep in mind as we work through the remainder of the course. We're also going to provide you with a real high-end end-to-end field service demonstration where we're going to create a work order, we're going to assign that work order, dispatch that work order out, we'll have somebody go out on site, actually complete that work order, and then we'll hand off that work order and actually invoice it in the system so you can see end-to-end what the entire solution looks like. And then we're also going to talk just a little bit about how you want to look at from a planning perspective. What are some considerations that you want to keep in mind when you start to really build this field service practice and build this field service solution inside Dynamics 365? When we talk about field service and field service capabilities, what exactly are we hoping to accomplish as part of the solution that we implement? Well, you can break it down into 4 baseline areas. First and foremost, it's really about the work order that you're going to be sending out. These are going to define the actual work that you're going to be doing for your clients when they get out on site. Work orders could potentially be created in many different ways. You might have a situation where maybe you have a help desk agent who is working on a case, and for some reason that case now needs to be escalated and actually have somebody physically go out and dispatch that. Maybe you're trying to troubleshoot a printer, or you're trying to troubleshoot some network diagnostic situations that's just not working over the phone. So we're going to dispatch a technician out and work with it from there. From that standpoint, we would be able to automatically generate a work order from a case within that situation. Or maybe you're going to create a work order just as part of your company's sales process. Maybe you have a situation where somebody is going out and they're quoting an opportunity, and you've now won that opportunity, and now you're going to convert that opportunity into a work order so somebody can physically go out and maybe perform the install or something to that nature. You also might want to look at, particularly in today's day and age, portal capabilities, where you have a customer who is going to submit a work order directly through the portal. As we work through the remainder of this course, we're going to talk about the work order creation process in general, but that's really a critical aspect as to what you're working with. Now, obviously, once that work order is created, the next thing that we need to look at is, who's going to perform this, and how are we going to designate that particular person? And so that's where scheduling and dispatching come into play. It's not only, understanding that you're making sure who the right person is that you're working with, but you're also optimizing how you're scheduling. If you already have technicians that are out in the field, you can look at their geographic location in comparison to the work order that needs to be scheduled and dispatched for, and maybe find somebody that's in a 15-mile radius or a closer proximity to that situation. And so now you can cut down on the amount of travel time and expenses that need to take place as you're dispatching people out into that situation. These are all things that can really have a drastic effect on how your organization is operating and what's the efficiency level that your organization is operating at from an application standpoint. Now that we know who's responsible and who's actually going to be in charge of this work order, now we actually have somebody that's going to go out and deliver that service. And so now these are things that you want to consider from a service delivery perspective. What type of device does that technician have at their disposal? Are they going out and using a tablet? Are they using a phone? Do they have to capture signatures? What happens if that service activity or that work order runs long? How are they going to affect that situation? Do we want to have communication with our customers and let them know, the status, that somebody's actually en route and who's coming, and do we want to provide them additional details about that person? How is that actual delivery of that information going to be carried out as part of the application? And then finally, once that person has gone out and completed that work order and actually conducted that service, now we need to go through and just do a quick little review of that process and make sure that everything was done to our customer satisfaction standards, make sure that the customer's happy with everything that they've done, make sure that we haven't had any issues that have arisen during that process, and then allow them to actually physically close that work order and now generate an invoice within the system. And if there's any inventory or anything that needs to be deducted from the system, take all of that into consideration, or if there was any additional items that need to be purchased as part of that process, what were those specific items so we can bring those items into the mix. And so that's really, when you start talking about field service, that's really the 4 key components. And what you're going to see as we move through the remainder of this is we're going to tie a lot of the specific Dynamics 365 field service capabilities to each one of those individual pots. How does Dynamics 365 for field service fit into the overall field service picture? Well, really it allows you to handle and touch pretty much any of the items that are going to be critical to the day-to-day operations when you consider what you're doing from a field service perspective. What you're going to see here is really, what you see on the screen here is really just kind of an overview of some of the key features that we're really going to dive into in much more detail. But at a high level, when we look at some of the key items that are out there, first and foremost is work orders and work order management. Understanding how you're going to generate those work orders within the system itself and understand who's all going to be responsible. When we talk about the work orders, we talk about, you know, the tasks that are going to be associated with it, costs that are going to be associated with it, service locations as far as where you're dispatching people out. These are all considerations that you need to look at from a work order perspective as you're going through. You also start talking about scheduling and how you're going to dispatch that. And there's a couple of different options that are available to you from a dispatching perspective when we start talking about scheduling with Dynamics Field Services. It's Schedule Assistant, which is more of a kind of semi-automated way of being able to dynamically filter down subsets of information based upon, you know, things like geographic location, territory, skill sets of people that will be performing those individual items, as well as being able to go out into the schedule board directly and be able to navigate through the schedule board and see specifically who's doing what within those items. We also talk about how you're going to manage resources and being able to go out and configure information to be able to best match the appropriate agent in the field with the work order based upon, you know, availability and proximity. So for example, if you are going out and you're doing a network implementation and that network implementation requires that somebody has a skill set in working with routers, you would be able to find technicians within your organization that have that skill set and now be able to go out and provide some of that information as you're moving forward. You also can manage some of your different locations as well as customer asset. So storing information about, you know, where you're going to be servicing those customers. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into account types. So what's the difference between a billing account and a service account and a sub account within the context of field service, but also understanding that you will be putting specific pieces of equipment out at these customer sites and they will label those as customer assets. And how are you going to be able to work with those customer assets and keep track of those inside the system? And oftentimes when you're looking at a field service type of implementation, it's not really always just about being reactive. A lot of times it's about being proactive. And so a lot of times you have preventative maintenance contracts that you will create where you can actually go out and generate agreements inside Dynamics 365 for field service that will go out and generate reoccurring work orders to ensure that everything that you're working with from a customer perspective is maintained properly before issues occur. Manage your inventory. Understand and extend the Dynamics 365 product catalog with your inventory management solutions to be able to see, you know, what's considered a warehouse in the application and track inventory levels at a warehouse level, including maybe what might be out on a truck. So a warehouse might not necessarily be a physical building. It might actually be a warehouse or a truck that somebody is servicing information from, as well as looking at how we can more effectively go through and service customers using things like the mobile application. So the mobile application gives your field technicians the ability to very quickly and easily go out and execute those work orders. And again, we're going to talk much more about each one of these as we move through, but let's hit some of the key concepts here at a high level. So work orders are really the cornerstone of what you're going to do inside field service. They really capture the essence of what it is that you're trying to perform. So if you're going out and you're performing, you know, a break fix situation or a preventative maintenance situation, there's going to be, you know, different levels of how that's going to be billed. There's also going to be different tasks that are going to be associated with that based upon what specific type of service it is that you're providing to the customer. So really think of a work order as what are we hoping to deliver to that customer and who is the customer or the location as to where we're going to be delivering that particular functionality at. The other thing that's nice about work orders is this is where you can now go out and coordinate and schedule resources and the activities that are associated with those. So I know I have 10 different things that need to take place when I go out and I service a printer. I need to replace the toner cartridge. I need to go through and run, you know, oil and grease all the different gears, I need to run through this particular process, I can make sure that I'm identifying what those tasks are and then going out and finding resources that match those specific requirements and then using those resources to move forward as I'm going through. The nice thing about work orders is you can set up different types of work order types within Dynamics 365 for field service. That might include things like installs, repairs, preventive maintenance. You can really define what these different work order types are based upon your organization and what specifically your organization does. And the other thing that you can do is field service takes advantage of what's called smart scheduling, where you can actually go out and schedule the appropriate resource with the appropriate equipment to actually go out and make sure that you're meeting anything that you might have from an SLA perspective. And it does that through a couple of different perspectives. The first one that it does is through what's called the schedule board. And we'll go in and show you the schedule board in much more detail in a future module. But if you look at it here, what this allows you to see is, who are your resources that are a part of your organization. A resource could be any number of different situations, and we can start to see what their schedule looks like. And we can see different scheduling options that need to be appropriated based upon those individual items. So I can look at specific work orders who are assigned to individual people, and I can actually see down here towards the bottom, it shows kind of a legend that shows me where we are at within that particular work order. Somebody's committed to going out and working on that. If it's green, somebody's in progress and is actively working on that, and I can see if people are traveling. It gives me the capabilities to see exactly what's going on at a click of a button. And as I'm scheduling information, I can actually filter information down on the schedule board by different resource type or service that I'm trying to provide or skill set to really allow me to very quickly and easily find the most appropriate resources based upon the item that I'm trying to work through. And then it allows the schedulers that are going to be creating this information to actually customize this interface to their specific needs. So each dispatcher can have a little bit different version of the schedule board based upon what their personal preferences are as part of the application. And the other option that you have is what's called the scheduling assistant. So the scheduling assistant actually allows you to go out and apply different constraints to actually query for the appropriate resources on a little larger scale. So instead of saying I just want to filter it by territory or I just want to filter it by resource type, now I can go out and say, okay, I need to find the first available time that I have a technician that's available for a 2-hour block. That person needs to be within 20 miles of where this work order is going to be scheduled for or the customer location. And I'm going to work on this with, we're flexible in regards to the fact that, I either need them out there 1 or 2 days from now. So I can pick start and end days and now have them go out and find the appropriate resources to really be able to handle that. So it takes some of the guesswork out of what it is that you're trying to accomplish inside that individual situation. The other thing that's nice with the field service capabilities with Dynamics 365 is the whole concept of resource management. And what's neat with resources is resources could be any number of different things inside the application. They could be obviously employees that work for your organization that are going out and servicing your individual customers. They could be things like pieces of equipment that you would use to actually go out and perform some type of operation or skill set within the application. They may be accounts, contacts, maybe you have third-party vendors, but these are typically going to be items that are used to service work orders within the application. You now have the capabilities to get a baseline view of all of your different resources for your organization, and from those individual resources, be able to assign them what are called characteristics or skill sets that define what they're proficient in from an application standpoint. So you can look at different skills and certifications and you can assign them different proficiency models. And then as you're going out and using things like the scheduling board and the scheduling assistant, we can now look at people based upon their proficiency models and determine whether or not we're looking for somebody who's just mildly proficient in something, or maybe somebody who's more, absolutely proficient within that scenario. But it now gives us the capabilities to better understand who our resources or what our resources are and better maintain and manage their schedules so we can use that information as we're moving forward as part of the scheduling process within the application. And then finally, it's about, how are we going to be delivering that server? And one of the nice things about that is the mobile capabilities that are available with Dynamics 365 for field service. And so you now have the capabilities to allow your technicians to be able to go out and use either a handheld device or a smartphone or even their laptop to go out and provide these services. And you can let them open up their work orders and their bookings and see what is on their schedule and actually go out and enter information directly into the application so they can use that information as they're moving forward to do things like maintain and grab a customer signature. All of these different key elements really build into what the Dynamics 365 for Field Service solution allows you to accomplish. So let's go in and take a look at the Dynamics 365 for Field Service solution and just kind of provide you through kind of a day in the life of type of situation. So first and foremost, it is part of the new kind of app modules. So if you go into your Dynamics 365 and you have Field Service, you'll see Microsoft Dynamics 365 for Field Service. When you click on Field Service, it'll take you into the Field Service app or the Field Service module, which will have all of your menus and all of your navigation streamlined for field service capabilities. When I click on Field Service, I'll receive a drop-down that will have all of my field service information, as well as a resource scheduling option. So one of the things that's neat now with the new capabilities is it does what's called unified scheduling. So you can schedule actually more than just work orders. If you have cases or if you have opportunities or if you have other items inside the application that you want to schedule, you can actually create and define them as schedulable items, and you can then go ahead and schedule those as part of the schedule board. The other thing that the resource scheduling is going to have is it's going to show you all of the available resources. It's going to show you where you can set up your resources, your resource roles. You can define skill proficiencies, which we'll talk more about as we move through this individual course. We'll talk a little bit more about some of your organizational units and booking statuses, but this is where you could go in and really define all the different schedulable resources that you would be used. These are the primary elements that are used both from a field service perspective, but also from a project service automation perspective. With inside Field Service, if I click on Field Service, I will see all my different field service elements that I can navigate to. And they organize them based upon kind of topic of items. So work orders obviously will be any work order that will be entered into the system. Schedule board is where you or your dispatchers will go in to schedule individualized items. And then from a resources standpoint, the resource bookings will allow you to see all of the bookings that have been assigned to you and other resources inside your organization that you need to carry out that will be attached to your work orders. Then you get into some of your individualized situations around your actual, service level agreements, your customer assets, requesting time off, purchase orders, and we'll talk about all of this information as we go through. But I want to talk just kind of about day in the life. So let's go into work orders. And I can see in here all the different work orders that we currently have inside this implementation. And just at a glance, I can see what the schedule is of each one of those options. So I can see whether or not it's in progress. I can see if it's an item that's been opened but and has been scheduled. I can see if it's an item that has been opened but not scheduled. So it's basically sitting there waiting for the dispatcher or some other type of methodology to go out and schedule that item within the application. But let's go ahead and create a new work order. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new work order. We're going to specify the work order, the account that we want to service. So the technician will need to be dispatched out to this particular customer location. And we'll say in this case they need to go out into Blue Yonder Airlines. I'll then specify and see that it comes in with a status of unscheduled. I can use additional system substatuses in here to define additional items that allow me to target this information in a little bit more detail. Now, the next piece to this is, what is the technician going to be doing when they're out on site? Well, the technician's going to be going out and they're going to be working basically with and servicing a specific item. So in this case, we're going to send them out because they need to replace a fan that is broken on a particular item. So by selecting an incident type of fan, it now goes out and it gives me my estimated duration for that fan. And now I can go down and I can see that it's a service call. It's going to be using our default price list because all of this information has been pre-populated as part of the item. Then I can go ahead and choose save and close. Now, what ends up happening, I'm going to go ahead after I save and close this real quick. If I open this back up, What's nice about the work order functionality is all of this information, or much of the information that I need, has been pre-populated. If I look, I can see that there are specific tasks that need to be associated as part of this, so when the technician is dispatched out, they will get all of that individualized information at their disposal that they can now work with. I can also see individual products and or services, so I can see individual products that are associated with this item as well as services. So now that the work order is created, I am going to dispatch this. So as a dispatcher, I'm going to work primarily in the schedule board. So when I go into my schedule board, I will see all of the available resources for my organization. And based upon those individual resources, I can go out and define who I want to schedule for different items. So I can see in here that I have different resources. I can see who's currently working on what. I can see how long they've been working on those individual items. I can see different statuses based upon whether or not it's in progress, whether somebody is actively traveling to that location, and I can just get kind of an overall definition as to what's happening. When we go into the actual schedule board module, we'll show you how to manipulate and navigate through all of this information with much more detail. But in this situation, I want to go ahead and I want to schedule this work order for Derek. So I'm going to go ahead and find Derek on my resource schedule board. So we'll give this just a sec to reload. I can see Derek Borman. I'm going to go into my unscheduled work orders, and I can see that I have an unscheduled work order here that I want to schedule for Derek. So I'm going to just very simply drag this to the schedule board and position this at the specific time that I want to work with. By doing that, it automatically generates and creates what's called a bookable resource booking, which basically books Derek for that specific time frame and that specific time on that day. So this will now show up and be available for Derek to go ahead and service as part of his schedule. So now let's switch over to the persona of the person who will be going out into the field. So I'm out into the field and I'm accessing the field service mobile application on a mobile device, and I can look at my bookings and I can see kind of the agenda of the items that I have to work with today at this particular point. So I can see what I am currently doing for these individual options. So I can see that the item that I've gone through. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up first and foremost this new item that has been scheduled for me for Blue Yonder Airlines. So when I click on it, it's going to open up the work order and I can see the specific work order. I can see that it's been scheduled and I can see what specific durations and items that are associated with it that I need to work with. As I go through, I can go in and I can see the specific tasks that I need to accomplish as part of this particular option. So I will be able to select those tasks and then mark those tasks as kind of a completed operation. I also could capture customer signatures from this standpoint. But let's look at the one that I'm currently working on. So I'm going to go into this one where I'm traveling. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open this up, and I can see that I have some service tasks that I want to do. So the first thing that I want to do as part of this booking is I'm no longer traveling, I'm actually at the customer site. So I'm going to switch this to in progress. Then as I switch this to in progress, I'm going to go ahead and switch my service tasks. And I can go ahead and now open up these individual service tasks. So I'm going to go ahead and mark off the stuff as I've completed it. So I'll mark this as 100%. And I'll do the other one here real quick. Now, if there's any products or services that I need to be aware of into this, I can look at those specific products and services and I can work with those individual items. But at this point now, I am going to go ahead and capture a customer signature. Now, I don't necessarily have a touchpad at this point, but I could sign this, have a customer sign this on my touch screen. I could now save and capture the signature. Now that I'm done with my particular item, I could now go back into that item and I could go ahead and complete it. So let me just go back into that item here real quick. Switch my status to completed. And save. And that's going to update that automatically and let everybody know that I have now completed that particular item, and now I can move on to the next item within my specific stack. So this is how, from a work order creation process all the way to the end, you can kind of see exactly what it would work with. Now, as we go through each individual one of these options, we'll get into these in much greater detail and show you more specific examples of how each one comes into play. We touched on this a little bit at the beginning of the module when we looked at field service as a whole. But using that same line of thinking, you can really use that to start to plan how you might build and deploy your actual field service implementation. Most of the components that you're going to be working with can really be brought back to any one of these kind of core factors that we talked about. Work order creation, scheduling, dispatching, service delivery, and then review and billing. And so as you're going through and building up your field service practice, or even just doing your field service implementation, there's some critical questions that you need to ask yourself that are really going to drive the decisions that you're going to use to determine how exactly you're going to configure the application and then build some of the functionality as you're moving forward. And so obviously that first one is really the work order creation. And when we talk about the work order creation, we're talking about how are those work orders going to be created? Is this something where your dispatchers are going to go out and create them manually, or are you going to offer maintenance agreements? So do you have service contract type situations where people can go out and have monthly maintenance that would be set up for that individual situation? So for example, maybe you work with kind of a like a healthcare company or something like that, where you have different wellness devices that you have to go out every month and actually service that information. Using some of those automated processes, we'll be able to go out and generally automatically schedule those work orders for you. Now, if you think about things like Internet of Things, you may even want to start talking about things like connected field service. Can some type of event that's triggered by some type of smart device create a work order inside Dynamics 365 Field Service? Now, when you're talking about how these work orders are going to be created, the other thing that you want to keep in mind is what information is going to be entered in based upon where it's coming from. So if it's coming from an email, or if it's coming from a portal or something like that, what information are we capturing, and what information is going to be important to that in order for us to move forward? And the other thing to understand is once that work order has been created, how do we signify or mark that work order as ready to be scheduled, so now it can go into our schedule board and we can hand it off to our scheduler and our dispatcher, and they can actually physically go out and kind of modify that. So you want to look at how are people going to be entering that information? Are you going to be using portals? Are portals a part of the conversation? Do we need to look at that? Are you going to strictly be doing manual situations? Are your technicians going to be able to create or update this information in the field? These are all things that you want to keep in mind when you start talking about how specifically your work orders are going to be generated inside field service. Now, the other option would be your scheduling and your dispatching. So how are you going to handle the actual scheduling process? Is it going to be strictly a manual process where dispatchers are going to go into the schedule board and they're going to look at the unscheduled work orders, they're going to compare that with the list of people and services that you have available, and now move things around to be able to go through that? If so, what skills are important? How are you going to understand what specific use cases or skill sets people need in order to allow that dispatcher to effectively schedule that information inside the application? Are you going to use some type of automated process? Are you going to use the scheduling assistant? Are you going to optimize your resources? If so, what are some of the considerations that need to be brought into that as you're moving forward? Now, when we start talking about things like resource optimization and things, those are a little bit out of the scope of this course, but it does constitute at least a little bit of a planning. If you can understand what that manual process looks like, and even that semi-automated process using the schedule assistant, it makes it much, much easier when you start looking at your actual resource optimization and looking at some of the resources and the constraints that are involved with working with that. And then obviously, when you start talking about performing the work on site, how are the agents going to be working with that? Are they going to be using the mobile application? If so, what's pre-existing information does that technician need to have in order to access or determine what information they are entering? Do they want to have communication with the customer? Are we going to be sending them notifications as to who that technician is, that technician is en route and on their way? Are we going to send them a picture ahead of time? Is it up to the technician to capture signatures? What type of situations do we want to have to make that as easy as possible as the people are going in and physically working through those? And then finally, once the service is complete, how are we going to handle that billing billing situation. You know, are we going to follow up with that customer? How are follow-ups being done? Are we going to have integrations with a back office software? A lot of times you may already have some type of ERP system that's handling some of the billing and inventory management. So is it a matter of being able to connect field service into that different situation, or are you going to try to handle some of those inventory adjustments through the application? Now, it does provide some inventory management and purchasing capabilities, but a lot of times there's going to be external systems that you want to interface with. And so how are we going to mark that system or that work order as completed? And once we mark that work order as completed, what's the next step in actually physically triggering an invoice inside the application to make sure that we are sending out invoices in a timely manner? These are really just some of the core considerations that you want to look at when you start planning your field service implementation. Now, as we go through, like I said, the remainder of this course, we're going to look at each one of these individual items in very specific detail when we start talking about the mobile applications and the back office stuff and the scheduling and dispatching. And so these are some of the questions that you want to start asking yourself as we list through some of the different features in regards to how you're going to plan that field service implementation moving forward. As you can see from really this brief overview, introduction, and demonstration, Dynamics 365 for Field Service provides a ton of different options that you can use to really help and kind of build your field service deployment. As we move through the rest of this course, we're really going to look at each one of these topics in much greater detail, but we're always going to really focus on kind of those 4 key components that we talked about initially. It all comes back to work order creation, how those work orders are going to be created and defined within the system, who's going to be responsible for creating them, what individualized situations are going to be taking place when those work orders are created, and how are we going to handle notification that they're ready to be scheduled, scheduling and dispatching, understanding when a work order is ready to be scheduled, and how you are going to determine who the most available and capable person is for carrying out and working through that work order as part of the application, and then ultimately dispatching that person, the appropriate person, out to be able to go out and actually conduct that service for that customer. The delivery of the service, what type of methodology or what type of implementation options are you going to use to allow the technicians who are out in the field to really carry out those services? Are they going to be using mobile applications, and what specific utilities and tools are you going to give them as part of those mobile applications to really build and work through those service deliveries? And then also reviewing and billing, understanding when are we going to designate that work order and the work for that work order has been completed inside the system, and then from a billing perspective, how are we going to trigger off the invoicing process, and what should be done from an inventory management standpoint once that work order has been subsequently invoiced. Are we going to deduct some of that information from our inventory stocks within our Dynamics 365 application?